I've never been a fan of the like baby talk or like talking down to kids. I've talked to him very similarly to how I would talk to an adult within reason.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh my God, I am living a technological nightmare today. Nothing with my computer is working. But all that aside, I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. All computer technology woes aside. We are working our way through it, Melissa. We're doing great.
Yeah, I think that is a good moment to add a disclaimer that we did have technical difficulties while recording this podcast, but it is still so juicy and so worth listening. So anyway, let's dive in. Today, we have Beth Leipholtz here. She is Beth from Beth and Coop, the creator behind the ABCs of Inclusion, the viral book teaching kids all about differences with heart, humor, and of course, lots of honesty. Beth's journey into parenting took some unexpected turns, and she's turned those surprises into something really awesome, which is helping families everywhere raise really kind, curious kids. We are diving in today to what happens when parenthood does not go as planned, aka every day for me,
Same.
and how inclusion starts at home.
Hello, Beth. Thanks for being here today with us. I want to start by diving right into your story so our listeners can get to know who's Beth and who's Coop from Beth and Coop. Can you share a little bit about your story as a mom, about like Coop's diagnosis, about Coop as a wonderful little human being?
We always like to say he was kind of a surprise from the beginning. My husband and I got engaged in January of 2019, and like 36 hours later, I found out I was pregnant. So total like shock and not anything we were planning. He just kind of kept the surprises rolling. So like, you know, I just kind of wrapped my head around becoming a mom and Brandon becoming a dad when he was born. And we were like, okay, we got this. And then we got his diagnosis pretty early on. We had an indication that he hadn't passed his newborn screening for hearing in the hospital. That wasn't like a definitive. We got his definitive diagnosis when he was 6 weeks old, that he was profoundly deaf. So essentially had not heard anything ever. From there, it was really, let's figure out what we can learn, what our options are. And I think anyone who follows us know that we kind of took like a bilingual approach, started using ASL immediately, and also went the route of cochlear implants, which both have been a process. And both we let Coop take the lead. And if you know Coop, you know Coop likes to talk. So utilize both, and I don't regret anything about the route that we took.
I can imagine it must have been like a shock to you. Like, I don't want to give that like the negative connotation that it usually has, but I think like, just like I can imagine it comes as like a surprise to hear that your kid can't hear when they're going through all of the little tests when they're a newborn. How did that feel for you and for your husband to like get that realization?
No, I mean, shock is definitely a good word, because you know when you are two typical hearing adults, that doesn't really cross your mind. Brandon's does have deaf relatives, so his aunt, cousins, and her kids are all deaf, but they do not have any signs of Waardenburg syndrome, which is actually what Coop's diagnosis is, which I can elaborate on a little bit. But even going in, we knew that likely we weren't going to have any response from him in the auditory brainstem response, which was the actual like in-depth test. But still being told that was hard. Like you prepare as much as you can, and like I knew in my mom gut, I just knew because we had already come across Waardenburg syndrome through somebody in a Facebook group, because Cooper was born with a patch of white hair. I had like asked a question like, is this like a birthmark? Does anybody else's kid have this? And she was like, oh, I've heard that can be like associated with Waardenburg. And so of course I Googled it right away, which can be like awesome and can be horrible, as we all know.
Yeah.
Started reading about it, and it was kind of like this like physical checklist of like his features. And then, got to the component of, often hard of hearing or being deaf is a component. And so at that point, it all kind of just clicked. And like, even though we hadn't had his real in-depth test yet, we had a feeling. But I think I was still holding on to like a shred of hope that like, he could hear a little bit in one ear, or like it was something that was progressive. And in retrospect, I know now that like for our scenario, the best possibility was just that he was, profoundly deaf, because a lot of families end up kind of playing a waiting game if their child has some hearing in terms of like, okay, what route are we going to take? Are they, even eligible for cochlear implants? So it ends up being kind of a longer process, and you miss that window of like crazy language development with kids. So yes, it was a shock. It also wasn't a shock. Kind of went through like a very fast process of like the stages of grief, I would say, apart from denial. I don't really feel like we ever were in denial about it. but being like action oriented is what has always helped me out of scenarios like that. Or like, I shouldn't say out because obviously I didn't like escape it, but it made me feel like I was doing something, like some part of it was in my control.
I think in some way we all as parents go through this feeling of, oh, parenting is not exactly what I thought it was going to be. Because there's so many surprises in parenting in general. But as somebody who had bigger surprises, and you always talk about how Coop was a surprise from the beginning, and I feel like that's an ongoing thread in your family's journey. Can you tell us like how that essence of surprise has maybe impacted the way that you parent, or the way that you and your husband view your family, and like what might be around the corner?
It's hard to say to a degree because, you know, you say impact the way that you parent, but like this is all I've known as far as parenting. I think it would have been a different experience too if we'd had like an older child that was, you know, typically hearing to be able to compare it to, but it's all Cooper knows and it's all we know. Like we've never had to be quiet during nap time. We've never had to, you know, like certain things we just don't have to worry about. But I will say like parenting as a whole, if you had asked me before I had Cooper, I would have thought I'd be like a type A Pinterest mom, color coordinated, you know, all of those things, because that's how I typically am in my life. But I realized very quickly that Cooper was not going to allow me to stay sane and try to be that way. He's had a personality and it's continued to develop. And I have had to very much like loosen up as a whole. I mean, my mom even like looks at me parenting some days and she's like, she just can't believe that like it's the same person that I was before him in terms of being able to just like go with the flow and be like, well, it is what it is. Like he's going to do what he's going to do to a degree, you know, not within reason. So I do think it's definitely changed me for the better in that way, being able to kind of roll with the punches and just sit in chaos, because before it would have sent me into a spiral.
I'm curious, like what does a normal day for your family look like in terms of language communication? How have you approached that when he was a baby, a toddler, to like the 6-year-old that he is now?
Yeah, obviously it's evolved over time. Now he's in kindergarten all day. So that changes things quite a bit. So he was 10 months old when he got his cochlear implants. So up to that point, we really just used sign language as much as possible, which we were also learning. So it's kind of it's hard to teach it when you're still learning it yourself. From that like 10-month point to probably like 2-3 years old, it was just constant narration of everything, which is probably not surprising if you see Cooper or hear Cooper talk now. Like that's very much how he is because that's what was modeled. So like just, you know, being in the car, exposing him to like talking about the trees outside, talking about houses we pass, everything. Working on with early intervention in Minnesota, there's 0 to 3 early intervention programs, which is amazing. I think we're one of a very few states that offer that. So we immediately had services from our schools. He had his surgery in June of 2020. So really that first year of his like hearing journey was us, like at home, you know, and like virtual check-ins, that kind of thing. And emerging from that, I think was probably the almost harder than anything, because we were suddenly again around like people who had kids at the same age and they were talking, whereas we'd been in like our little bubble for that year. And so I think it had just become normal to us. And then it was like, oh, like this is what a quote unquote normal linear journey is like. He developed language pretty well from 3 to 5 or 5.5. He was in preschool. Our district has been amazing. Our teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing here is just like a powerhouse. She actually has a class, and we're in rural Minnesota. I should say that because that was one of my big concerns, was being so rural. There's a class called Foundations for Literacy. The whole curriculum is designed for deaf and hard of hearing kids. So there were actually 6 of them in it for the last 2 years.
Wow.
Which is pretty awesome for all around his age for this district. And so I credit that with a big majority of like the reason that he's been reading for 2 years and knows as much as he does. And then he was also in mainstream preschool. And then now obviously we're dealing with the shift into kindergarten, which has been going like surprisingly well. I was kind of waiting for like the shoe to drop for a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, I did get a phone call last week just with some of the like behaviors that I was expecting to hear about. But even that, like we were able to say, okay, he's probably getting really fatigued in the middle of the day when he has music, gym, lunch, recess, all of which are very loud environments. A lot of like sorting out background noise from focusing on who is talking. And we were able to kind of take that and be like, okay, so after recess, let's make a plan that he comes in and kind of decompresses in the room with his deaf and hard of hearing teacher or interpreter. Maybe he takes a hearing break if he wants to, which means just taking his implants off, and see if that makes a difference going forward. So we've been very fortunate. Like I can't say enough about the education and communication within our district. And I know that that's not always the case for parents. So I feel very lucky.
That's so nice to hear. I love I love to know that there's actually like positive stories about our public education systems because it's so, I feel like it's just so rare and typically the narrative is so negative, but it's so cool that you guys have that there and it's just awesome that this exists and you guys are getting exactly what you need.
I mean, it's amazing because we have 5 elementary schools that feed into the, middle and high school. And they kind of a few years ago starts segmenting to a degree. So not like requiring, but like many of the deaf and hard of hearing kids do go to the school that Coop goes to because they kind of can funnel resources better that way. So like even all around the school, when we went to open house, I'd never been there. There's like signs labeling each of the rooms and they have like the ASL translation as much as you can in like a picture, or they have like the ASL alphabet up, or students that
so wonderful.
are showing certain signs. So it's just really cool that they go above and beyond.
Did you ever think about moving? Like what you mentioned at the beginning that you were worried about being rural and how that might impact options for him. Did you guys ever think about like what you might need to change with your family when you first heard about his diagnosis?
Yeah, I think we would have probably considered that more if he hadn't taken so quickly to preferring like speaking and hearing. We maybe would have considered more of like a school for the deaf or a kind of somewhere that focuses more on helping kids develop that language. But because he just took to it so well, and obviously, we did the work too, but some kids still just don't really end up liking it. They prefer to sign. I think that made us feel a lot more confident. And also, like I said, our teacher of the deaf here is just like, she's so good at what she does and so communicative and like kind of just lays down the law too, which is like what Cooper very much needs. That kind of built our confidence, seeing that through preschool. I'm happy we didn't because I love where we are.
I'm so happy that you have like that support that you need so close by. It's so funny how you say like how Cooper loves to talk, because it's something that people in general don't expect with deaf or hard of hearing kids, that they are so chatty and so talkative. And your car chats are honestly legendary. They are so funny and they bring me so much joy and wisdom every time I watch them. It's always so curious to me how stuff so profound can come from a kid like that.
We always call him like an 80-year-old man in a kid's body.
But it's so funny and it's so true. What is something that you feel like you've learned from Cooper that no adult has ever taught you?
The amount of patience that I have with him is something that I never experienced before. Like I've always been a person who likes to move very quickly and gets frustrated easily, and it's not something that I've had to force. Like I do it because I want to be patient with him. I want him to like gain understandings of concepts, and so it's something that comes naturally with him but doesn't elsewhere. And I think that that's been really eye-opening for me to see like that certain people can bring out certain parts of you.
That's so wonderful. I had one that I was listening to that you just posted recently. It was like, I think about how you told him like, can you drive the car? And he was like,
oh,
I'm just a child, Mom.
A child.
And that was so funny because like there's like this innate wisdom that kids of his age often, it's not lack, but it's like they haven't gotten to that point yet and he's already there. And I do feel like I've seen you credit like your talks with him so often that like you've been referencing all of that. Is that something that always came like naturally to you? Was that something that was recommended to you? Is that something that just felt natural to you to do and you would have done with your kids anyway?
I think it's kind of twofold. I mean, obviously I took the recommendation to always like be talking and narrate and model language, and I followed a lot of professionals in that field on social media. So like I was seeing it there. So it was easy to kind of take that and implement it. But I also just have never been a fan of the like baby talk or like talking down to kids. I've talked to him very similarly to how I would talk to an adult within reason. Sometimes we have to explain words, and you see that in the car chats too. He'll question what a word means. But once you explain it, it stays and he understands the context, and then he'll come back and use it. So it's really cool to see that, because I think, a lot of times that would have to be repeated over and over, but his memory is just like a steel trap.
A lot of parents might be in that stage where they feel totally lost about something that they just discovered about their child. Something like one of these curveballs that you feel like, how am I going to deal with? It's like, what is something that you would say to them?
Find a community. I think that was a lifeline for me. Even on social media, just find families who shared their story of being hearing parents and having a deaf child and seeing like that their child could sign but also speak, and like how cochlear implants had changed their life. I think there's a lot of misinformation around cochlear implants depending on like where you are getting your information. I mean, people will often say it's brain surgery. It's not brain surgery. It's an outpatient surgery. Like you're in and out the same day. It doesn't mean that it's not still surgery. There can be a lot of controversy around them. And I think for me, it was eye-opening to kind of see different sides of it on social media. You know, I've also made sure that I follow like deaf creators and deaf creators who don't have hearing devices and who only sign. And like, it's been very important to me to get the full perspective from deaf culture to hearing, because that is part of who Cooper is. And it's something I will never be, you know, so I want him to be able to be exposed to that as much as possible. But I think that played a factor in like why I started sharing our journey. Part of it was processing, but part of it was also like, I knew how much I needed it early on and how comforting it was to like read words that somebody else had written that felt like I could have spoken, or see a video of a child with implants chattering nonstop. And I think for some people who aren't necessarily as, I don't even want to say extroverted, because I'm not like super extroverted, but I'm just okay like being social. Like that can be a scary thing to like reach out, but you can still follow, you can still take things in, you can still join Facebook groups and just not be the one posting right away. Like there's still a lot of ways to like passively find a community.
That is such a good answer. Oh my God, I feel like we could all use our own little community at times. And it is like I have my own little communities that I'm all part of. And whenever I'm in the dark a little bit about something, I just need reassurance that like I'm not screwing everything up. That is then like the community is where I'm going to. Now, I want to touch on something else. That is that we're talking a lot about how parenting Coop has changed you as a person. I want to be very aware about the fact that people with different abilities should also be able to exist without being made a hero or a role model, or someone like, it's very often that you see someone with like a limb difference and they're talking about like, oh, they're so brave, they're doing, and like they are brave but they're also just living their lives, and they should be able to do that in the most normal way possible. How do you see that? How do you feel about that?
Specifically with like our experience, I guess and this has kind of happened naturally, kind of mindfully too. Like I obviously still share about Cooper's diagnosis and about how cochlear implants like impact things. But I think a lot of our journey has really shifted to sharing more about just parenting and like that relationship between parent-child as a whole. Like I don't ever want that to be his identity, but at the same time, I want him to be confident in who he is with his implants. And, you know, so it is something we talk about often, and we are continuing to say like, you know, you are different. There are different things that, you know, might need to be done. Take, you know, what I was just saying earlier about listening fatigue, for example. Like, I don't know that was a term he had ever actually heard until I sat him down the other day and I explained like, you have to work a lot harder to listen than most people. And as a result of that, you might get more overwhelmed and need more breaks. And that's okay. Like you're not going to miss out on everything if you just kind of reset. I think it just comes down to the individual too. Like some people are very comfortable saying, yes, I have a disability and I need things to be different because of that. And other people very much want to not say that and not identify as disabled. And I think it very much is up to the individual, is something that I've kind of learned along this way. Even when I say occasionally like special needs child, there are people who jump at me and say like, it's not a disability, it's not. And at the end of the day, it is, because he has different accommodations made.
Exactly.
And they help him. They give him access to an equal, in this case, education. But it is something that I just kind of try to keep the dialogue open with him about.
That's so fair.
One thing I was really excited to learn about from you, Beth, is about like how you share your life, because Esther and I talk about this all the time as parents with a company, and the idea of like bringing our kids into the fold and showing people our lives, just how you're impacting other families and why it was important for you to share this journey publicly.
Initially, part of it was me processing. I've always kind of been like an external processor in that way, whether through writing or video. It's just kind of how I've always made sense of things. I got sober in college and I actually started writing about that and sharing. And that was a way that I found a really big community out there of like, you know, women, younger women who didn't drink. And so it's kind of the same thing when I was going through like, you know, everything with Coop. That was how I chose to process, whereas my husband is very much more like an internal processor. From there, it kind of turned into, oh, I can also be this resource that like I leaned on so much in the beginning, where somebody who's going through it now can come and see our videos and realize like, it's gonna work out. It's something more and more now that I am mindful of, because as Cooper gets older, I've always wanted to be respectful of him and what I share. There's no book written on sharing your journey on social media. There's nothing like guidelines to follow. And in all transparency, like, it was nothing that I ever set out. I never expected this. Like, I didn't set out like, oh, I'm going to gain this following and have all these people that are along for the ride. Like, that was never my intention. It just kind of accidentally happened and continues to grow. So it's very much something that I'm navigating too. And I think, a few years ago, I kind of made the decision to not really share any like of his negative moments as far as like tantrums or cry, like, within reason. And I don't share those. That does not mean that they don't happen. I think people often are like, oh, he's so happy, he's so funny. Like, yes, he is, but he's also very much a 6-year-old. Like, he has meltdowns. He has moments that he's just not having it. And so I think it's just kind of a double-edged sword in that sense of like, you want to be real and authentic, but you also don't want to, risk sharing things that don't need to be shared. And I think my middle ground on that is like, if it's something that relates to this journey, I'll still come and talk about it in a video maybe, or like explain things that have happened and kind of what came as a result, but it's not something I'm actively sharing in the moment, if that makes sense. And it's something too, like, I keep that dialogue open with Cooper too, now that he's older. And I know people will say like, oh, he's 6, he doesn't understand. And it's like, he understands a lot. Like, he really is good at gaining like big concepts, but he also like at times will watch little like family vlogs on YouTube Kids or like, and I think that's really helpful because when we do a car chat, it's like easy to be like, oh, this is, similar to that, where other people like to watch it and they think it's funny. And the other factor is like, it's not like he's a shy, reserved kid that I'm like forcing to be in things. We never record anything if he doesn't want to. He's always aware of it. And he also is very much like center of attention, look at me child. Like, he likes to make people laugh and he likes to have eyes on him.
I wanted to ask you about raising inclusive kids. So a lot of parents want to actively raise inclusive kids, but they worry that they will get it wrong or do it wrong. What is something you wish more parents understood about how to start those conversations?
Let your kids ask questions. I always think back to, at one point we're in a waiting room just at our normal like doctor, and somebody had a kid there around Coop's age, and this wasn't even related to Cooper, but there was a different adult in the room who was in a wheelchair, and the kid asked the parent a question like, why is whatever, and the parent kind of like shushed them and said, did they like, oh, it's rude to ask questions thing. And like, I think that's damaging to a degree. I mean, I don't disagree that there are times that it's not like opportune to to ask the question or the way the question is asked, but like, you also don't want to steer kids away from asking questions because that's how they learn. Like, 90% of Cooper's interactions with me are asking me questions. But I also really appreciate when we're out in public and a child obviously has a question about his implants and is confident enough to ask and learn about it, because it not only helps how they interact with him, but if it helps going forward if they meet anybody like him. And so I think that's, to me, is the biggest thing, is like encouraging kids to ask what they're wondering about and trying to explain it the best you can, like on their level.
That is so good. I love not scaring kids away from curiosity. that is such a core part of who I am as a person, to keep that curiosity and like make the little spark turn into like the biggest flame. You also wrote a book about inclusion. You wrote the ABCs of inclusion after realizing that like how few books reflected families like yours. I'm going to ask you what inspired you to create it, although I feel like I can like kind of gauge why you wanted to create it. But I do want to hear it from you. Like, why did you feel like that need to write your own book like that?
So I had kind of written like a nonfiction account of just our journey to that point, and self-published it. And I had a few people ask, like, have you ever thought about writing a kid's book? And I was kind of just like, I don't know. It's like a long process and I don't really illustrate because all of that. It just felt like a lot. But I started thinking about it, and like a lot of the books that I had found that had anything to do with kids who were deaf or hard of hearing focused very much on just that. And at that point I knew, like, okay, if I write a kid's book, I want to be able to speak to more people than just that like niche audience, not because it's not needed, but just because I know it can be done. And at that point, obviously, like our social media had started growing, and I realized that there were a lot of parents following who were raising children with like various disabilities. It wasn't just deaf or hard of hearing kids or those parents that could relate to the struggles and the types of things that we would go through. And I still remember I was like driving. I remember exactly what exit I was at on the freeway when the idea just like popped into my head. Like, okay, what if like each letter of the alphabet was actually represented by like a real child and their diagnosis? And that's kind of where it, I guess, originated, the idea itself. But I had a friend publish a book with an independent publisher in the Twin Cities. So I kind of chatted with her. And I think from there, it was just like, it had already taken root and I wanted to make it happen. So luckily they were on board and it kind of, started that crazy journey. It's been almost 3 years now since the first edition came out.
I can imagine that like a book like that is also super, super helpful for educators and schools to like keep around in their class to start that conversation on inclusivity in their classroom. How can we as parents, as educators who aren't well versed in like the deaf community, I would say, because like I feel like if you are not a part of it, then it's also not easy to like get into that into that community. How can we make an effort to make the world more inclusive to people from the deaf community?
Yeah, and I think it's important too to distinguish like there's people who identify as deaf with like a capital D, and they're very much part of the deaf community. Often they mainly use sign language as their form of communication. And then there's people, like Cooper, who are kind of in the middle, where he has an interpreter at school. He takes it in receptively, but he doesn't really use it expressively. There is that like important distinguishment, I guess. I know with him, because he does have cochlear implants and that changes how he hears, I try as often as I can to let him, see me when I'm talking. Obviously, in the car, that's not ideal, like certain scenarios, but it's more important in situations where there's like a lot of background noise, or in scenarios where like he can't see me, but he's like yelling to me from another room. I mean, we all know that from a parent situation. You can usually be like, I'm in here, and they can like locate that sound. That's really hard for him. So like I have to be super descriptive, like I'm in the upstairs bathroom, or I'm, so little things like that people don't really think about, that people who are deaf or hard of hearing, do rely on. COVID was probably a nightmare for a lot of people because they do still lip read to a degree. Like even Cooper still lip reads. If you watch him, like while he's having a conversation with me, his eyes are focused downward more than they're focused on me. As much as he relies on hearing, he still does that. So I think those are all really big components, but I think it also goes a long way to make an effort to learn like some signs to be able to communicate that way, even if it's basic stuff. I've been out in public before and somehow I forget all of my sign language that I know when I have to talk to an adult. I just get like all panicky. But, when it has happened, like they're just happy to realize that like, some. And I think it's becoming more frequently taught in schools too as an option for languages, which I think is really cool because like it wasn't when I was in high school. But I do hear that from more parents that like even, in elementary and middle school, their children are being exposed to it and are excited about it because it probably is something that, because it's so expressive, it pulls kids in more. You watch like the interpreters at concerts and things like that, and it really is like an art. It's just so cool to watch. So I think, it really depends on the individual, and I think that's probably the most important thing is asking the person that you're interacting with, because they're going to prefer different things than somebody else is.
I don't think it's as common in Belgium to get, because I'm located in Belgium, and I don't think it's as common to like get sign language as like a class in school. But I feel like listening to you, and like I felt strongly about this before, that like it should almost be mandatory to learn sign language in school for kids growing up, because like when they're so young still, like it's so much easier for them to learn, and it's just like another way that we can be more supportive of like everyone in our community and not just the people who can hear. And it like saying it out loud like that makes it sound like a no-brainer. But unfortunately, like in this day and age, like it's still like so hard to like get like that kind of legislation actually through.
There's so many different factors that come into play in terms of being able to communicate with such a wide variety of people that, it's hard. It's like I would love to know every language, but my brain is not going to let me do that.
At least like there is a progress being made, and I think it's part and thanks to people like you sharing their stories so broadly and making it more widely known, and making sure that like kids like Cooper are getting to be part of their own community and like the general community and not being shunned away like they would have been 100 years ago.
Yeah.
You often show how joyful and fun your family life is and not just like the hard parts. So as a final question, I wanted to ask you why it is so important to you to show that like that joyful side of your story too.
I think we all know that the world is a very heavy place right now, especially in the US in certain instances. I know a lot of social media is just inundated with politics, whether you want to see it or not. I've often said, like, I wish there was like a little toggle because like sometimes I'm really in the mood to see things and other times I'm like, I just want to laugh.
Yes. Fair.
There's obviously times that it's harder. Like people are not always nice on the internet. But the good far outweighs the bad. And when I read through comments and see like, you know, my mom was just diagnosed with cancer and this made me laugh, or I've been really depressed for the past few months and this gave me a smile. Like that is really what keeps me wanting to share, like knowing that it can bring people joy. And like, it brings me joy daily. Like I live this daily and he still just makes me like cackle every day because of what comes out of his mouth. But I think it's also important that people realize that kids can grasp big concepts and, you know, they're little sponges and they soak everything up. And I think that's very evident when Cooper talks. I want to be able to give that happiness to people and let them, you know, if they need to escape their own life for a little bit and laugh, that gives them a place to do it. Yes, the internet can be a dumpster fire, but it also can be a really amazing tool in connecting with the people that you need when you need them.
Such words of wisdom. Well, I'm sure that you and Cooper bring so much joy into people's lives, and we're so grateful to get to see like the little snippets of it. Thank you so much for being here, Beth. We had such a blast talking to you, and this was so insightful, and like there was so much like so many little nuggets of wisdom that we get to take with us into our daily lives, and we're so happy you were here with us.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
That was amazing. I love what Beth said about finding her people and finding her community and encouraging all parents to find their community, even in like the struggles that you can all face parenting the unexpected, that a community can really be there for you and just feel a little bit less alone in that time, I think.
Totally. I feel like you can read every book and still nothing hits quite like another parent just being like, yeah,
that's
I've
us
been there.
Every day about everything.
That is every day. And so community doesn't really make parenting easier, but it makes it lighter, like so much lighter. And it makes you just feel less lonely, I think, too. And I think Beth is a really wonderful example of the product of community and also the creator of community. So if you're listening and you're still trying to find your community or your people, just keep looking. There's always someone out there going through what you're going through. Yeah, it's a really powerful thing. So we hope you can all find it. And if you need somewhere to start, go find Beth and Coop. They're wonderful. You can find Beth and Coop at Beth_and_Coop on all social media platforms. Beth and Coop, you will not regret it. They are lovely people, and Coop is just hysterical and adorable, and it's the best uplifting content out there. And as a reminder, please go find and read Beth's book, The ABCs of Inclusion. It is delightful, and it's coming out very soon. In the meantime, you always have us, your other community. So please don't forget to come join and chat with us online. We are Doing Great Pod. That's at We Are Doing Great Pod on Instagram and TikTok. Yeah, we're excited to chat with you. Come find us. And until then, we will see you next time. Okay, and that's the pod. But please don't go anywhere yet. Don't press any buttons. Before you go, we want to remind you that We're Doing Great is brought to you by Poc Poc, an award-winning company reimagining how kids play and learn using technology. If you appreciated this episode, please give us 5 stars so other parents can come find us too. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Come find us on Instagram and TikTok at We're Doing Great Pod. We would love to talk to you and learn from you and just chat and be friends. And until then, don't forget you're doing great.